Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. The air is cool, so cool that you can see its breath on the glass panes of the window. Outside, the night is still draped over the countryside, though streaks of lavender are beginning to tint the eastern sky. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows, a lonely sound in the vast quiet. But here, within these stone walls, the night has already ended. A single bell tolls, then tolls again, louder this time. It is the call of matins, the first canonical hour of the day for a man living under the rule of St. Benedict. And with it, the sleep of the monastery ends. You rise from your straw pallet, tucking the rough homespun sheet around you as you slide off the narrow bed. There is no rush in your rising, no flurry of activity. The other monks are stirring too, some already kneeling in prayer, others yawning as they make the sign of the cross. Quickly you pull on your coarse wool habit, the only garment you will wear all day. It is the livery of your order, the symbol of your dedication to God and the life that you have freely chosen. Pulling the hood up tight, you follow the others out of the dormitory and into the cold flagstone floor of the corridor. As a novice, you walk behind the senior monks, heads bowed in silent prayer as you pass beneath the watchful gaze of the crucifix set into the wall. The church is your second home, and here you come to pray the hours of Lauds together. As the sun rises, bathing the high windows in gold, you join the other monks in singing the psalms. The sound of your voices echoes through the vast space, carrying your praise to the heavens. Your day is divided into 3 parts, divided by the solemn tolls of the bells, which summon you to prayer, work, or study. Work and study alternate throughout the day. You might spend an hour copying a manuscript, painstakingly recreating the flowing script by hand, or you might help the others in the fields, planting crops or gathering in the harvest. You eat in silence, each man alone with his thoughts. Food is simple, coarse bread made from locally grown wheat, and vegetables from the garden, perhaps some fruit if the season allows. Meat is rare, only served on feast days or when visitors come to the monastery. The afternoon is given over to study. The Bible is sacred, so you might copy its words to create a new book or repair an old one. But many of the texts you study are also secular, for learning was a key part of a monk's life. You practice your Latin, reading passages from Cicero or Augustine, and you ponder the words of Boethius, contemplating what it means to be good and what it means to be happy. Just as the sun begins its slow dip toward the horizon, it is time for your final work detail. The evening chill has begun to set in, so you hurry to finish your task. Soon, you will come together again in the church to pray the final canonical hours of the day, followed by a final psalm in the refectory before returning to the dormitory. One by one, the monks climb into their beds and cover themselves with their thin blankets. Sleep is light, often troubled by dreams of fire and brimstone, of shadowy figures lurking in the woods outside the monastery. Even in sleep, you are not truly safe from temptation. In the morning quiet, you confess your sins and failings to an older monk. He listens patiently, then offers a penance to cleanse you, perhaps a number of Hail Marys or Our Fathers to recite. You return to your prayers, striving to make yourself worthy of God and to cast out the failings of your sinful self. This is the life of a medieval monk, a life that may sound idyllic, even peaceful, but is in truth demanding, disciplined, and very far from restful. Each hour is accounted for, each action purposeful. This life is not for everyone, but for those who choose it, there is no other way to be. Now we turn to the life of Saint Benedict. Born in the mid-400s, he grew up in a turbulent world. Rome had fallen to the Goths, and Germanic tribes roamed Italy, pillaging as they went. Many young Roman aristocrats fled the violence of the empire, seeking refuge in the Egyptian desert. There, they lived lives of solitude, fasting, and prayer, hoping to save their souls by withdrawing from the corruption of the world. But Benedict did not wish to live in the desert. Instead, he wished to bring the ideals of solitude and contemplation to the wilds of central Italy, where bandits and wolves preyed on travelers and the land lay untilled and uncultivated. Around 529, he founded a small monastery near the town of Monte Cassino. His followers were soon joined by others who shared his vision, men of different ages and backgrounds, all seeking to dedicate themselves to God. Together, they built a church, a workshop, a refectory, and dormitories. They planted orchards, vineyards, and gardens, turning the wild land into a productive farm. Within a decade, Benedict had created a community of 120 men living in faith, hope, and charity. Though bound by vows of obedience, poverty, and chastity, he allowed flexibility in the type of work his monks pursued, recognizing that a man could best serve God using his particular talents. Benedict also recognized that the needs of the community sometimes took precedence over prayer. When messengers from the Ostrogoth king arrived asking for the monastery's help in reconciling warring Italian factions, Benedict sent out a group of his most eloquent monks. The public success of this mission led to more calls for mediation, and eventually Benedict and his followers became known across Italy as peacemakers. After his death in 547, Benedict's followers spread out across Europe, founding new monasteries that became centers of culture, education, and industry. Though vastly different from one another, these monasteries all operated according to the rule of Saint Benedict, a guide to prayer, work, and community that has endured for 15 centuries. Now we turn to the topic of illuminated manuscripts. In the world of the medieval monk, literacy was a valued skill. Every monk was expected to read and write Latin, and many spent years copying religious texts, secular texts, letters, and legal documents. But copying was expensive, both because it took so much time and because the materials were costly. Parchment made from the skins of sheep or goats cost about 8 shillings per sheet. Ink made from squid or fruit juices cost 6 pence per ounce, and the best quills from the feathers of large birds cost 2 pence each. Because of these costs, few books were produced, and fewer still left the monastery. Of those that did, most were Bibles or other religious texts, which were highly prized by wealthy patrons. Some books, however, were made for monks to use, like the Book of Kells, a lavishly illustrated manuscript containing every word of the New Testament written in a beautiful script and decorated with intricate borders and full-page illustrations. The Book of Durrow, also called the Book of Dares, was another early example of an illuminated manuscript. It contains the 4 Gospels of the New Testament written in Latin and decorated with exquisite Celtic-inspired artwork. These books were created over a period of roughly 100 years, from the 6th to the 8th century, and are believed to have been made by monks on the island of Iona off the west coast of Scotland. Though their creators are unknown, the books are named after places where they survived the ravages of time. The Book of Kells came from the monastery of Kells, while the Book of Durrow can be found today in the library of Trinity College, Dublin. Both books are renowned for their artistic merit, their historical significance, and the sheer beauty of their craftsmanship. These creations were not mere decorative flourishes. For most monks, reading was a sacred duty, a way to commune with God. But not all monks could read, and even those who could often struggled to decipher the flowing script. To address this need, monks would decorate their manuscripts with elaborate initial letters, often filling them with images that helped them remember what the page contained. Sometimes they would go further, adorning their books with full-page illustrations and intricate borders. While creating these works took time away from more important tasks like prayer and copying texts, many monks found a deep satisfaction in their work. Making these beautiful objects was a way to express their faith, a chance to transform the mundane into something spiritual. Finally, we turn to the lives of the abbots and bishops who lived lives quite different from those of the average medieval monks. While most monks were poor, working hard to keep their communities running smoothly, some monks lived lives of luxury. Abbots, the leaders of monasteries, and bishops, the heads of dioceses, held immense power and wealth. They owned vast estates, worked by the labor of their monks, and received regular donations from grateful parishioners. Life as an abbot was often easier than life as a monk, though it required a delicate balancing act. Abbots were responsible for the well-being of their communities, but they were also expected to maintain good relations with the local lord, who could grant or withhold permission for building projects and other important matters. Bishops, meanwhile, were responsible for the spiritual well-being of entire dioceses, overseeing numerous churches and the priests who ran them. They were often involved in local politics, serving as advisors to kings and queens and popes. Despite their power and privilege, the lives of abbots and bishops were not without their challenges. During the 8th century, for example, the Carolingian emperors waged war against the Lombards in northern Italy. In the midst of the conflict, the bishop of a town named Lucca was summoned to appear before the emperor. He arrived wearing magnificent robes and a mitre on his head. The emperor greeted him warmly, saying, "We have heard much of your wisdom, and we desire to converse with you." The bishop responded, "Most clement emperor, I have nothing to say to you unless you wish to hear the true word of God. If you want anything else, I am not your man." The emperor was outraged and ordered the bishop thrown into prison. Such tensions between temporal and spiritual authority were common in the medieval world, and it fell to abbots and bishops to navigate them. Despite the challenges, many abbots and bishops used their power and privilege to benefit their communities, building schools and hospitals, caring for the sick and poor, and promoting the arts and sciences. They were, in many ways, the leaders of their communities, shaping not just the spiritual, but also the social and cultural landscape of medieval Europe. And with that, our journey into the cloistered world of the medieval monk has come to an end. If you found this topic as fascinating as we did, we invite you to join us for more historical explorations. Before you go, don't forget to hit the like button to ensure you never miss any of our new videos. Until next time, keep thinking historically. Do you ever feel like you're stuck in a boring routine, like every day is the same? Well, imagine if you lived in a place where every single day was exactly the same. That's what life was like for monks living in Europe during the Middle Ages. Let's go back to a time when life was simple, faith was strong, and the days were always the same. Imagine yourself in the depth of night. The air is cool, almost damp, pressing gently against the skin. A silence hangs heavy in the monastery, broken only by the faint sound of footsteps on stone. Then, from a distant tower, the bell begins to toll. It is not morning yet, not in the sense you know it, but it is time to rise. The hour is just before dawn. In some monasteries, the monks awoke as early as 2 or 3 in the morning. They did not wake to comfort, but to duty. The stone floors underfoot were cold. The air in the dormitory was sharp, for heating was rare and costly. Cloaks and simple woolen garments provided little warmth, but the monks were expected to endure. From their narrow wooden beds, they rose and gathered, moving in silence to the chapel. Imagine the echo of sandals across long corridors, the flicker of torches lighting the path, and the steady pace of men who had walked this same route every day of their lives. The chapel was not grand for most monks. It was plain, the stone unadorned, the space unheated. Yet it was here that the first great work of the day began, prayer. Their voices rose together in chant, Gregorian, slow and measured, not sung for an audience, but directed heavenward. The sound filled the cold air, weaving through the arches like a steady current, each voice blending into the whole until individual singers disappeared. After this first service, the day unfolded in a strict rhythm, set by what was known as the divine office. 8 times a day, the bells called the monks back to prayer. At dawn, at mid-morning, at noon, at mid-afternoon, at evening, and again deep into the night, they gathered. Each prayer was structured, each psalm chosen for the hour, marking the passing of time not by sunlight or season, but by devotion. Between these hours of prayer, the monks worked. Some labored in the fields, bending low over the soil, their hands roughened by spade and plough. The monastery was often self-sufficient, and it required grain, vegetables, herbs, and livestock to sustain the community. Others tended vineyards or orchards, their days tied to the rhythm of growth and harvest. Inside the cloister, others took on quieter but no less demanding tasks. In the scriptorium, monks sat hunched at wooden desks, quills in hand, copying manuscripts by the dim light of candles. The ink stained their fingers, the steady scratching of the quill filling the silence as they traced each letter with painstaking care. Imagine the patience it required. One mistake, one blot of ink, and entire pages could be spoiled. Meals were plain, often consisting of bread, broth, and occasionally fish or vegetables. Meat was largely forbidden. Meals were eaten in silence, while a single monk read aloud from a religious text, his voice a steady murmur accompanying the clink of wooden spoons against bowls. Eating was not for pleasure but for sustenance, another act of discipline. The rhythm of their lives repeated day after day, season after season, bells, chants, work, silence, sleep. Yet even their rest was brief, for the night was broken by the call to prayer. Sleep might come in fragments, 3 or 4 hours before midnight, then again after the last vigil, never the long, uninterrupted rest you know today. There were hardships, always. The cold of winter seeped into their bones. Illness spread quickly in close quarters. Their clothes itched, their backs ached, their stomachs often ached from hunger. Yet, through it all, they lived with the rhythm of devotion, believing each discomfort was a step toward holiness. Now, if you're wondering why anyone would choose to live like this, let me tell you, it wasn't easy to become a monk. These men weren't just looking for a quiet life. No, they were serious about their faith. To join a monastery, a man had to make a vow, a promise to God to leave everything behind, his family, his old life, and dedicate himself fully to religion. It wasn't just a job, it was a way of life. The vows they took were for the long haul, sometimes lasting a lifetime. These men were ordinary guys who decided that they wanted to live an extraordinary life for God. Maybe they felt lost in the world. Maybe they wanted to escape the noise and the drama of everyday life. Or maybe they simply wanted to do something great for God. Whatever the reason, they gave up everything to follow a life of prayer, hard work, and simplicity. Their days were long and tiring, but they didn't complain. They knew that their work was important. They weren't just monks because it was easy. No, they were committed to a higher calling. They believed that their work was a way to get closer to God, to show their devotion and to earn their salvation. And even though their days were hard and their nights were cold, they never gave up. They kept going day after day, year after year, because they knew that their work was a gift, a chance to make a difference in the world. As the centuries went on, different orders of monks developed their own specialties. Some became renowned for their knowledge of herbal medicine. They spent their days studying ancient texts and their nights tending to the sick. Others dedicated themselves to helping travelers, providing food and shelter to those who needed it most. Still, others became experts in crafts like metalwork or carpentry, creating beautiful works of art that are still admired today. But it wasn't all hard work and no play. Despite the seriousness of their calling, the monks found ways to have fun too. They organized athletic competitions, staged theatrical performances, and even kept pigs for their own amusement. Of course, their leisure time was always balanced with their religious duties. After all, they were monks. But they knew that a little fun was a good way to keep their spirits high and their dedication strong. Now, I know what you're thinking. Doesn't this all sound a bit boring? I mean, who wants to spend their days copying books or tending to farm animals? Well, maybe you're right. But don't forget that these monks were part of something bigger than themselves. They were building communities, helping others and making beautiful works of art. They were also creating a legacy that would last for centuries. Their work preserved countless books, helped spread Christianity throughout Europe, and inspired generations of artists. So maybe being a monk wasn't so bad after all. Sure, it wasn't for everyone, but for those who chose that path, it was a way to make a real difference in the world. So the next time you feel like your life is boring or repetitive, just remember the monks. They were ordinary people who chose to live extraordinary lives. And who knows, maybe you have what it takes to do the same, and now it's your turn. What would you do if you were a monk? Would you prefer a quiet life of prayer or a more active ministry? Tell us in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss out on our exciting stories. And thanks for watching. Monasteries were not just about praying and working. They were hives of activity. They made wine, cheese, bread, beer, and books. That's right, books. Not normal paperbacks, but awesome hand-drawn, hand-lettered works of art called illuminated manuscripts. But why did they make them? Why not print them? Well, printing presses weren't invented until thousands of years later. Back then, every book was handmade. These manuscripts were like super important scrolls, the best way to record stuff before the internet. So monks spent tons of time copying old texts by hand. But that's boring, right? Well, not really. See, these guys were artists and they took pride in their work. Their manuscripts were beautiful, full of colors and pictures. They put tons of detail into them. It wasn't just copying, it was creating works of art. Now, let's go back to the story of the rule of St. Benedict, because it didn't just affect how monks prayed and worked, it also affected what they ate. Now, imagine you're a monk and your day starts at midnight. What do you eat first thing? Probably nothing. Midnight isn't really breakfast time anyway. Monks usually ate 2 meals a day, breakfast and supper. Lunch was out of the question. They didn't want to take long breaks during the day. Remember, they had to work hard and pray a lot. Breakfast was simple, usually bread, cheese and fruit. No fancy cereals or bacon. And they didn't eat meat on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. Those were fasting days. They wanted to be humble and not waste food. After a long day of work, they'd eat supper around 6 or 7 p.m. This meal was a bit bigger, sometimes with vegetables, fish or eggs. But again, no meat on fasting days. They also drank a lot of wine. It wasn't just for fun, it was to help prevent diseases and purify water. Fun fact, they even made their own beer. Beer was safe to drink because it had alcohol. Water could have bad stuff in it, but boiling it and turning it into beer made it cleaner. Plus, beer goes with cheese, which was a staple in their diet. Now I bet you're wondering why they chose such a weird eating schedule. Well, it's all about balance. They didn't want to spend too much time eating or drinking. They thought it was important to control their desires and focus on God. So no feasting and fun, just simple food and lots of work. We know what you're thinking. Wait, you told us the dawn chorus started at midnight? How can you sleep with all that noise? Well, here's the secret. They didn't sleep in the same room. Each monk had their own cell, kind of like a tiny apartment. It had a bed, a desk and a closet. The cells were simple, not fancy, but cozy enough, and they had curtains for privacy. Now, they didn't use curtains like we do. Back then, curtains were just big pieces of fabric hung from the ceiling. You couldn't open and close them like today. Instead, they used them to divide spaces and give people some privacy. So if you were a monk, you could close your curtain for some alone time without anyone peeking in. But when it was time to pray or eat, they opened the curtains and joined the group. Now you're probably wondering if the monks ever got bored or lonely in their cells. Well, it depends. Some monks loved having their own space. They liked being alone and reading or praying. Others got bored and wanted to hang out more. But remember, they couldn't talk much. Talking was quiet. They could only whisper or use sign language. So if you wanted to chat, You had to leave your cell and find someone outside. But they didn't just talk about random things. They talked about important stuff, like the rules and how to improve their lives. They also discussed their dreams and visions. Sometimes they saw angels or saints, and they told their friends about it. They believed that these experiences could help them understand God better. The truth is, being a monk wasn't always easy. Sometimes it was boring, lonely, or hard. But they tried to make the best of it. They found ways to have fun without breaking the rules. For example, they created games using numbers and symbols. These games helped them remember prayers and stories from the Bible. They also made up riddles and jokes. They weren't allowed to laugh loudly, but they enjoyed being clever and surprising each other. Even their work was kind of like a game. They competed to see who could copy a page faster or decorate it with more detail. They also made bets, but instead of money, they bet on who would finish their tasks first. If you won, you got to pick what the other person did next. It wasn't a big deal, but it made work more exciting. But wait, there's more. You might be wondering what happened if you broke the rules. Well, the punishment wasn't too bad. If you annoyed your fellow monks or forgot your prayers, they might ask you to do extra chores or pray longer. But if you did something really bad, like stealing or fighting, they could kick you out of the monastery. Being kicked out was the worst thing that could happen. People didn't have nice houses to go back to or money to start a new life. So most monks tried their best to follow the rules and stay in their community. Oh, and guess what? Sometimes interesting things happened in monasteries. Once a king came to visit and stayed for a week. He brought gifts and sat with the monks during meals. Other times, famous people like artists and scientists visited and talked with the monks about ideas and inventions. The monks were curious about the outside world, even if they didn't live in it. They read letters from people telling them about new discoveries and events. This way, they learned about important things happening far away without leaving their monasteries. But listen up, because now we're going to share a secret. Being a monk wasn't all good vibes and prayers. Sometimes it got wild. Picture this. You're minding your own business, copying a book when suddenly someone shouts, "Fire!" Chaos erupts. People run around screaming, trying to save their stuff. But the fire keeps spreading, destroying everything in its path. This actually happened in monasteries back in the day. Fires could break out at night when monks slept with candles, or during storms when lightning hit their wooden buildings. Fires were scary, and monks didn't have fancy tools to fight them. They had to pass around old buckets of water and try to douse the flames, but it wasn't easy. And get this, sometimes hungry wild boars would charge into the monastery looking for food. These wild parties weren't uncommon, especially in places like France and Germany. But wait, there's more. You might have heard of scary ghosts roaming around old buildings. Well, monasteries were no exception. Rumor has it that some monks encountered creepy ghosts in their dark and spooky buildings. These ghosts might have been other monks or ordinary people who died in the monastery. It's hard to say, but that didn't stop people from sharing scary stories about them. And finally, you might wonder what happened to monks when they got old and sick. Well, taking care of sick monks wasn't easy. There weren't many doctors or medicines back then. Most monks tried to cure illnesses with prayers and herbs. When they got really sick, they often went to special places called shrines. These shrines were dedicated to saints, holy people known for helping others. So if you were a monk in the Middle Ages, your health was mostly up to luck and saints. Imagine it's the 1300s, and you're feeling pretty chill in your cushy monastery job. Suddenly, yikes, the Black Death hits. This nasty plague kills millions of folks in Europe. It spreads through fleas on rats, and you're stuck in a crowded monastery with poor hygiene. Yikes. But wait, your trusty dog comes sniffing around. Turns out dogs might have actually saved some monks. See, these furry friends sniffed out infected folks and warned them by barking or licking their faces. Dogs are awesome, right? So maybe having a pet dog in the monastery wasn't such a bad idea after all. So remember, being a monk wasn't all quiet prayers and peaceful vibes. Life was unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. But these brave monks kept going day after day, finding ways to keep busy and making the best of their unique situation. The year is 809. The place, the monastery of St. Gallen, tucked away in the Swiss Alps, home to around 60 monks. The leader is Abbot Waldo, a man in his late 40s, respected and well-liked. Life here revolves around prayer, work, and study. Most monks are in their 20s and 30s, though there are a few older ones like Theodore, who has recently turned 70. The community has a bakery, a kitchen, a garden and workshops for crafts like weaving, carpentry and metalwork. There's also a scriptorium where monks copy books, a guest house, a library and dormitories. Walfrid knows his men well. He watches over them with paternal concern. Recently, he's noticed a change in one of the youngest monks, named Goswin. Just 21, he'd joined the monastery a few years back, drawn by the promise of spiritual fulfillment. Now Waldred sees a troubled look on Goswin's face, and in his prayers he asks God to guide the young monk. On this day, however, Waldred is distracted. Bishop Erchenbald of Constance is visiting, and this is a big deal. The bishop oversees several monasteries, and his presence is both an honor and a responsibility. Everything must be perfect. The guest quarters are ready, the banquet hall is set. And as Waldred inspects the scriptorium, he looks out for errors. Each page should be pristine, each letter perfect. His eyes fall on Goswin. He's hunched over a desk, copying a manuscript with unwavering focus. Waldo sees a spark in his eye, the troubled look replaced by intense concentration. The abbot smiles. He knows Goswin is skilled, but he wants to test him. So he approaches and asks, "Can you pause your work for a moment?" Goswin looks up, startled, then nods silently. Together they walk to the refectory. Lunch is about to start, and Waltol announces to the assembled monks, "We are expecting an honored guest." Their eyes turn to Waltol, curious, and the conversation fades into murmurs. Suddenly, Erkenwald enters, followed by two attendants. All rise to greet him. There is a flurry of bows and pleasantries. The bishop is ushered to the head of the table, and everyone sits down. Conversation fills the hall, punctuated by laughter. The bishop, they learn, has traveled extensively, and he shares tales of his journey. Goswin listens intently. After lunch, it's back to work. For Goswin, it's a return to his task, copying letters with rhythmic precision. Bishop Erkenwald finds himself in the scriptorium too, not to write, but to observe. He watches Goswin working and is impressed. He too had once been a scribe, and he recognizes the skill involved. As he continues his rounds, a book is placed before him, and the bishop runs his finger over its pages. His thoughts drift to his own time in the scriptorium, and he remembers what it was like to spend countless hours in quiet contemplation. But he knows that for most of the monks, this would be unthinkable. For them, the claustrum was a place of duty, not devotion. To be assigned there wasn't a blessing, but a fate worse than hard labor. In his experience, the claustrum was where those who showed disobedience or questioned authority were sent. It was a prison of the mind, a punishment that left one's soul stunted. Still, he respects Waldred's choice of sending Goswin there. He can see how the young monk's talent is flourishing under the strict regime, how his dedication is turning raw skill into mastery. The bishop leaves the scriptorium, leaving the monks to their tasks. Outside, the sun shines warmly and birds chirp merrily. It's a beautiful day. The monks go about their chores, their faces a mix of resignation and tranquility. The bishop watches them from afar, understanding their lives, but never fully sharing them. He's a leader, a man of the world, and they are his flock, committed to a different path. Later in the day, while the monks tend to their tasks, Bishop Erkenwald steps into the scriptorium again. He pauses to watch Goswin working, and the young monk's focus surprises him. The hours pass quickly, and soon dinner is announced. Monks put down their tools and line up for their evening meal. Erkenwald stands apart from them, observing this ritual he's known for so long. As he eats, his mind drifts to Goswin. He too had spent countless hours in scriptoria, copying manuscripts by the light of flickering candles. And he remembers that when he was young, he found solace in the rhythm of writing, the feel of the quill, the smell of the ink. But he also remembers the boredom, the frustration, the times when his mind wandered and his hand faltered. And as he thinks about Goswin, he wonders if the young monk feels the same mixture of peace and tedium, excitement and drudgery, inspiration and confinement that he himself had felt all those years ago. After dinner, it's back to the scriptorium for Goswin. He picks up his quill and returns to his manuscript. For him, there's no question of obedience or rebellion. He simply loves what he does, finding joy in the precision of each stroke, the harmony of each letter. He doesn't notice the bishop watching him, or if he does, he doesn't acknowledge it. And Erkenwald, realizing that he can't truly understand the young monk's devotion, quietly turns and leaves. The next morning, sunlight streams into the scriptorium. Goswin yawns, stretching his arms above his head. Another day, another manuscript. But today is different. He's just finished a particularly intricate text, and he glances at the empty page before him. For a moment, he feels the familiar thrill of creation. The parchment is pure potential, a void waiting to be filled. And in that instant, he knows he doesn't want to just copy someone else's words. He wants to express his own. With a deep breath, Goswin dips his quill into the inkwell. The first letter forms slowly, carefully. This is his story to tell. And so the monk who spent his days copying the words of others began to write his own. In the ensuing centuries, while many monks lived disciplined lives in scriptoria, copying ancient texts, others did break the rules, engaging in heated debates with secular rulers, falling in love with local women, and even planning rebellions. By 1000 CE, Western Europe was dotted with monasteries, havens of faith nestled amidst the chaos of medieval life. Within these hallowed halls, monks dedicated their existence to the service of God. But their days weren't solely filled with prayer and piety. Far from the image of the monk as a cloistered book copier, these men engaged with the world in surprising ways. Let's delve into the rich tapestry of monastic life, exploring how monks shaped and were shaped by the world around them. Our journey begins in the bustling centers of learning, the scriptoria. Picture long, narrow rooms bathed in soft, filtered light, filled with the gentle scratching of quills on vellum. Here, monks toiled over their most crucial task, copying manuscripts. This meticulous work ensured the preservation of ancient texts, but it also served as a window to the outside world. As monks pored over manuscripts, they weren't confined within the monastery walls. Through the written word, they engaged with scholars, philosophers, and theologians across Europe. Some scriptoria even boasted heating systems and glass windows, transforming the copying of books into a near-idyllic pursuit. Yet the life of a monk wasn't solely defined by his craft. Monasteries often functioned as hubs of agricultural activity, with monks tilling fields, tending vineyards, and raising livestock. This close connection to the land meant that monasteries didn't just produce spiritual leaders, they also played a vital role in feeding local communities. Moreover, monasteries were far from isolated. In fact, they actively engaged with secular rulers, offering their services as diplomatic envoys and advisors. When Saint Benedict was summoned by King Clovis to advise him on matters of governance, he and his fellow monks didn't hesitate to share their wisdom. In doing so, they helped shape the development of early medieval states. Occasionally, monasteries became battlegrounds of a different sort. During the investiture controversy, a power struggle between popes and emperors over the right to appoint bishops, monks found themselves caught in the crossfire. Some stood firmly with the pope, while others aligned themselves with the emperor. These divisions sometimes led to violence, forcing monks to defend their monasteries with weapons instead of prayers. Lastly, the vow of celibacy that defined monastic life wasn't always absolute. While many monks remained celibate, others, especially in Eastern Europe, married and even had children. These monks continued to live communal lives, but with the added dimension of family. They weren't simply hermits or recluses, but active participants in the social fabric of medieval society. As we conclude our exploration of monastic life, remember that these weren't passive observers of history, but active participants. They prayed, yes, but they also engaged with the world in myriad ways. They copied books, but they also used those books to engage with scholars across Europe. They farmed, advised kings, and sometimes even went to war. And when the vows of celibacy were blurred, they lived with families, proving that monastic life wasn't just about solitude, but community. They were monks of flesh and blood, shaped by their times and in turn shaping the world around them. If you enjoyed this episode and want to continue exploring medieval history, check out this playlist. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified of new episodes. Thanks for joining me on this journey through time. Until next time, keep asking questions and seeking answers. We began our journey into the lives of medieval monks with the assertion that their existence was far from the usual perception of an austere, secluded life of prayer and penance. These men, after all, woke before sunrise, ate sparsely, worked tirelessly, and found solace in solitude. However, as we have seen, this image, while true for some, doesn't fully capture the spectrum of experiences within the monastic world. There were monks who became powerful figures, like the abbess of Quedlinburg, shaping not just spiritual matters, but political landscapes. Then there were those who delved deep into theology, leaving behind profound texts that continue to echo through the halls of history. Think of the likes of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, whose sermons on love and devotion still touch hearts across the centuries. And we mustn't overlook the monks who, through their artistry, breathed life into the sacred texts. Their illuminated manuscripts weren't just works of devotion, they were portals into a world where faith and aesthetics intertwined in a mesmerizing dance. These diverse roles, from the political to the theological to the artistic, all contributed to a rich tapestry that defined monastic life in medieval Europe. Yet, as we've noted, the life of a monk wasn't a monolithic experience. It varied widely depending on one's position, the specific order one belonged to, and the resources of the monastery. The daily life of an ordinary monk, then, was just one strand in this complex fabric. They woke with the sun, their days structured around prayer and work. Meals were simple, sleep was communal, and silence was golden. For them, the rhythm of life was dictated by the celestial bodies, the turning seasons, and the demands of the monastery. Every hour was accounted for, every task had value, and every brother had a role. This routine wasn't just about discipline, it was about creating a space free from the distractions of the outside world, a sanctuary where the pursuit of spiritual perfection was paramount. But what made this possible? What allowed these men to step away from the world, forsaking family, fortune, and the allure of worldly pleasures? The answer lies in the very structure of the monasteries themselves. These institutions, often situated in secluded areas, were designed to foster a life of seclusion. High walls, intricate gatehouses, and self-sustaining farms ensured that monks could live without relying on the outside world. Within these walls, they tilled the soil, tended livestock, brewed beer and baked bread, meeting their needs and reinforcing their detachment from society. The economic engine that powered these self-sufficient communities was largely driven by one resource: land. Monasteries, in fact, were often among the largest landowners in medieval Europe. This land, acquired through donations or inherited through bequests, wasn't just a means to sustain the community, it was a source of wealth and influence. Peasants toiled on these lands, paying rents or working as laborers, thus providing for the material needs of the monks while shaping the social dynamics of the region. This symbiotic relationship between monasteries and the peasantry significantly impacted medieval society, influencing everything from agricultural practices to the distribution of wealth. And yet, despite this economic power, the ideal of monastic life was one of simplicity and humility. Monasteries were supposed to be places where material possessions were renounced, where the focus was on spiritual growth rather than material gain. So how did these two seemingly contradictory forces coexist within the same walls? The answer lies in the concept of ora et labora, often translated as prayer and work. This principle wasn't just about keeping the monastery running, it was about giving meaning to the life of every monk. Through manual labor, they were detached from idle pursuits. Through communal effort, they built a sense of interdependence. And through the fruits of their labor, they learned to live with what was needed, not what they might want. As we've seen, the life of a medieval monk was more varied than commonly imagined. It wasn't just about the cycle of prayer and work, it was about intellectual pursuits too. Monasteries were centers of learning, housing valuable manuscripts, encouraging script copying, and fostering literary and theological discussions. It was here that scribes painstakingly copied texts, preserving ancient knowledge and producing beautiful manuscripts that are now treasured relics of medieval artistry. Moreover, it was within these monastic walls that important theological debates took place. Thinkers like Alcuin of York grappled with complex questions about faith and reason, influencing the course of theological thought. These intellectual activities, far from being at odds with the spiritual core of monasticism, enriched and deepened the religious experience. They helped monks understand their faith more profoundly and articulate it more eloquently. This engagement with the world went beyond the scriptorium. As we've discussed, monasteries often acted as stopping points for travelers, offering rest and perhaps a night's lodging. In a time when roads were treacherous and inns were rare, this service was invaluable. It's easy to imagine weary travelers, perhaps a noble on his way to a distant court, or a humble merchant seeking shelter, knocking on the monastery doors, seeking not just a place to rest, but a moment of tranquility in a chaotic world. In granting this haven, monks didn't just provide physical comfort, they offered a brief respite from the demands of a world that lay outside their gates. The life of a medieval monk was indeed rich and varied, much like the tapestry of medieval Europe itself. These men, living in communities that straddled the line between spiritual retreat and societal responsibility, played roles that were pivotal to their times. They were farmers, theologians, artists, and scholars, all united by a commitment to a life of faith and contemplation. Their days, marked by the cycle of prayers and work, were a testament to their dedication. Their nights, often filled with scriptural study or quiet reflection, revealed their thirst for deeper understanding, and their very existence contributed significantly to the cultural, economic, and spiritual landscape of medieval Europe. However, this picture of monastic life shouldn't evoke only admiration. It should also inspire introspection. How did these men, living in relative isolation, shape the course of history? How did their pursuit of spiritual fulfillment impact the political, economic, and artistic currents of their age? And why do their stories matter to us today? By exploring these questions, we not only honor the legacy of medieval monks, but also enrich our understanding of the world they inhabited and the complexities of human existence. In conclusion, then, the story of monks in medieval Europe is not a simple tale of silent devotion or secluded lives. It is a nuanced narrative of men grappling with faith, power, and the complexities of human existence. It is a story of monks who balanced spiritual pursuits with societal responsibilities, of those who found solace in solitude, and those who grappled with the temptations of power, of those who illuminated manuscripts with vibrant colors, and those who illuminated theological texts with insightful words. It is a story as rich and varied as the tapestries they wove in their scriptoria, and as enduring as the cathedrals that echoed with their chants. Now, my friends, we reach the end of our journey through the lives of medieval monks. If you enjoyed this exploration, consider joining us in the comments. Share your thoughts, ask questions, or suggest topics for future journeys. And if you'd like to continue exploring the rich tapestry of medieval history, don't forget to subscribe. Together, we can keep these historical threads alive, ensuring that the stories of monks and many other fascinating topics continue to resonate through the ages. Thank you for joining me on this journey back in time. Until next time, may your own journey through life be filled with moments of contemplation, creativity, and connection, just as we've encountered in the lives of medieval monks. The old clock tower chimed 8:00 p.m. Rain lashed against the glass windows, and wind rattled their panes. Inside, hunched over a desk, a single lamp casting elongated shadows on the wall beside him, sat an old man clad in a brown robe, his face lined and wrinkled like an ancient book, his eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. He was Brother Thomas, the last remaining monk at St. Joseph's Monastery. For over 60 years, he'd faithfully served God here in the solitude of these hallowed halls. But tonight, Brother Thomas wasn't praying. Instead, he was saying goodbye. He reached out a shaky hand and caressed the worn spine of a heavy leather-bound book. It was an ancient Bible, its yellowed pages filled with centuries-old prayers and meditations. Tonight, he was saying goodbye to this too. Tomorrow, both the monastery and its precious relics were to be handed over to the state. Years of dwindling numbers and mounting maintenance costs had forced the order to abandon this once vibrant community. And soon, this grand old building would house not monks, but tourists. With a sigh, Brother Thomas closed the book, its finality mirroring his own imminent departure. He was being transferred to a new monastery, one where his twilight years would be spent among a handful of aging brothers, none of them younger than 75. It was a somber prospect. Alone in the echoing vastness of the deserted monastery, Brother Thomas felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. The thought of leaving, of no longer tending to these ancient grounds, filled him with a profound sadness. For a moment he stood transfixed, his gaze sweeping across the familiar rooms, each corner holding a lifetime of memories. Then, straightening his shoulders, he turned towards the door. Outside, the storm had intensified. Rain poured in torrents, wind screamed its mournful tune, and thunder rattled the heavens. But Brother Thomas walked on, his steps firm despite the turmoil around him. His weathered face was resolute, his eyes reflecting the inner strength that had sustained him through decades of monastic life. This evening, he was to meet Father Abbot Gregory, the provincial head of their order, who would escort him to his new home. Though he didn't know it, this parting was not just a chapter closing, but the final page in the story of St. Joseph's Monastery. Reaching the main gate, he paused, turning back to steal one last look at the monastery. The sight that met his gaze was both majestic and heartbreaking. Bathed in the soft glow of a solitary street lamp, the silhouette of the monastery stood defiant against the raging storm. It was a picture of timeless grandeur, yet one laced with an unsettling finality. The scene was almost surreal, like a farewell sketch painted by an artist in the sky. Then, with a deep breath, Brother Thomas stepped out into the night. He adjusted his robe against the biting wind and started his journey into the darkness. He walked on, his silhouette swallowed by the shadows, disappearing into the heart of the tempest. With him vanished the last vestige of monastic life from this place. In the ensuing silence, the storm continued its furious dance, the wind howling its lonely tune. The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming a mournful rhythm on the stone courtyard. Inside, echoes of chanting monks lingered like ghosts. The scent of incense hung heavy, a phantom fragrance in a vacant hall. And on the worn pages of ancient books, the whispers of scriptures seemed to rise, carried on the storm's wild symphony. As if in a final act of defiance, a lone branch snapped, crashing to the ground with a resounding crack. It was as though the very structure of the monastery was crumbling, giving way to the relentless passage of time. The monastery, once a vibrant hub of spiritual devotion, now stood shrouded in the shadows of its past. It was a monument to a bygone era, a relic of faith surrendered to the relentless march of modernity. And as the storm raged on, the abandoned monastery seemed to shrink into itself, its spirit retreating into the recesses of its ancient walls. And so the night wore on, cold and desolate, mirroring the finality that had descended upon St. Joseph's Monastery. And now, our journey through the cloisters of medieval monastic life comes quietly to a close. We began in the darkness before dawn, walking with the monks as they rose from narrow beds, their lives shaped by bells, by prayer, and by work. We stepped back into the life of St. Benedict, who gave structure to their world through his rule, a rhythm that would guide countless men for centuries. We opened the glowing pages of illuminated manuscripts, treasures of devotion and artistry, their mysteries still whispering from the margins. And we contrasted the humility of ordinary monks with the power and comfort of abbots and bishops, leaders whose lives often strayed far from the simplicity of the cloister. Through all of this, a theme remains constant, the rhythm of their lives. The monks lived not by their own schedule, but by the tolling of bells. Each day repeated itself in chants and silence, in labor and in prayer. To us, it may seem wearying, even harsh, and yet in that repetition there was also stability. In a world unsettled by war, famine, and change, the monastery offered a steady heartbeat, day after day, year after year. As you listen, perhaps you can feel the contrast between their world and your own. Tonight, you lie in comfort, with warmth, with softness, with rest within reach. They in their stone dormitories knew little of such ease. Their lives were strict, austere, and often exhausting. Yet their devotion left behind traces that still reach us today. In books, in chants, in stone walls that continue to stand. History, in its quiet way, reminds us of endurance. It shows us how people lived within patterns far different from ours, and how, even within hardship, they sought meaning. So as this story fades, let it lead you gently toward rest. Imagine the distant echo of a bell, not to summon you to duty, but to carry you deeper into calm. Imagine the steady chant of voices, not to rouse you from sleep, but to lull you further into it. The monk's days were long, yours now is ending. You may drift slowly into silence, into ease, into sleep. Good night.